Join me tonight in Ecclesiastes chapter number 11. Ecclesiastes chapter number 11, as we are coming towards the end of our series. This will make you happy. I hope it's been a help or an encouragement or thought-provoking to some degree for you, as Solomon's been exploring different themes or pursuits that we are all prone as human beings in our frail, sinful minds to pursue, thinking it will be some level of satisfaction apart from God or in addition to God, or that it will help me get where I want to be in life or procure something I think I have to have. And yet, he's been just showing us each week what you think will make you happy really cannot make you happy. It's never been designed to make you happy. It cannot sustain you through these things of this life under the sun, as one of his favorite titles is. And so there is a God in heaven who we can trust, who we can look to, who loves us, who desires us to walk in his realm here on this earth and mindful of his economy. And so he's been showing us each week something different. And so tonight, as we close out chapter number 11, note what he says here in verses 9 and 10. He says here, "Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth, and let thy heart cheer thee in the days of thy youth, and walk in the ways of thine heart, and in the sight of thine eyes. But know thou that for all these things God will bring thee into judgment. Therefore, remove sorrow from thy heart, and put away evil from thy flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity." And next week we'll look at the famous verse that follows this and starts the new section in verses 12, or chapter 12, 1 through 8. And note what he says in verse number 1 just to help us. "Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them." I want you to back up and recognize what he's been doing here. Last week we talked about dealing with unexpected times of life. And as he closed down that section in verse number 8, note what he said there. "But if a man live many years and rejoice in them all, yet let him remember the days of darkness, for they shall be many. All that cometh is vanity." Then he talks to the youth about rejoice in your youth, but be mindful about your youth. And then he starts the same theme again there in verse 1, where he says, "Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh." He's really emphasizing, as he's coming to the close of his teaching, the close of this letter, he wants those who are of any age in adulthood to be mindful about their life and the way they treat life and the years they have with the Lord left here on earth. And now he's going to shift his attention to the younger generation. As we stated, he's just concluded dealing with the unexpected times of life that include days of darkness in the years of our life. And as he seeks to close this instructional book out, he knows there's a part of his audience, part of the audience that would read this work, hear this work taught, and then in future generations hear this work, that may not include themselves immediately in what he has been saying in this chapter and in the chapter to come. They don't think it applies to them, or if they do, they don't think it's now. It may not even be on their radar. If it is, they think it's for someone else or another time in their life. So Solomon takes the last part of chapter 11 and then in the opening parts of chapter 12 to direct the section of wisdom towards the younger generation. Now, it's very customary in Jewish culture and in other cultures around Jewish culture, Gentile cultures, for the older to seek out to instruct the younger. But then also, by default, the younger needed to seek out the older to be instructed in matters of life. And so here Solomon is, as an older man. He's traversed this life under the sun. He desires to give perspective to younger men and women so that they can glean from it, they can grow in it. And so he speaks to them while in their youth and makes the appeal for them to heed his counsel in their early moments of pursuing life. And so Solomon calls for eternal perspective to guide the enjoyments they have of this life's passions. He calls for them to have eternal perspective to guide them through the enjoyment of this life and the passions it contains. And here in these two verses, 9 and 10, he gives 3 imperatives for every young person's future. Now, I get automatically when we say the title, 3 imperatives for every young person's future, you're looking around saying, Awana's across the way, Pastor, and the student ministry is in the old auditorium. We are not in the young man stage. Maybe you're young at heart, and that's good, but I don't know of any of us that qualify in the young man stage by Solomon's definition. So you might say, so why are we going to address this? Because we also, in the New Testament, have the same obligation in the church of God, the pillar and ground of the truth. Titus told us, older men to teach the younger men, the older ladies to teach the younger ladies, and there should be receptivity and a seeking out from the younger to the older as well. And so tonight I would ask us to heed Solomon's words about these imperatives for every young person's future, and may we ask God to help us think about, if you have young people in your household, how you can utilize this to help them. But then, at the general application level, there's going to be some helpful truths for us to continue living as we have days left here on this earth. And so the very first imperative he gives for any young person's future that they need to frame the future by, the first imperative they need to employ is this: rejoice. Or maybe we could say it in this way: thoughtfully enjoy your life. The imperative Solomon tells them, rejoice. You should thoughtfully enjoy the life that God has given you. Note what he says here in verse number 9 as he opens it up. Rejoice, O young man. Shock, where's the imperative, right? Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth, and let thy heart cheer thee in the days of thy youth, and walk in the ways in thine heart, and in the sight of thine eyes. But know thou that for all these things God will bring thee into judgment. Note what he gives a picture here of. He says in the opening statement, rejoice, O young man, in thy youth. And then in the next phrase, in the days of thy youth. He gives here a picture of pre-adult times. It indicates a time of life when a person's young. It was generally used in their time to describe the period of life before one takes on full matters of, maybe we could say it this way, adult responsibilities, the full weight of human responsibilities. And if you think about it, he's talking to those who are probably, most likely, under age 12. And in under age 12, some of us are going to have to transport back further than others perhaps, but go back to when you were like 10. How many cares in the world did you have? I mean, my biggest concern was whether my friend was going to be home to play football or not, right? You know, and he says, transport yourself back there. And to the younger people, he's talking to them right now that up to age about 12 in Hebrew culture would have been when they would have had to start making more adult decisions, going towards an internship or whatever it might be for their path. But so think about it. We could even bump it up and do our American culture here. Let's say up to 18. He's saying to this generation here, to this time period, I want you to listen. Because it's an incredible time. It's a time that many spend in discovery, change, curiosity, but also, my friend, we know that time period is a great time period of what? Temptation. Temptation. And the decisions that are made, the choices that are made during this time often set the helm of the voyage of one's life. It's atypical for somebody to dramatically change past their teenage and early adult years, is it not? And so Solomon's saying, young people, I want you to listen. I don't want you to get down the road and wish you had heard this and wish you had listened to this. I'm telling you it now before you even reach some of those major decisions for your teenage and adult years. Certainly there's always the ability to repent, but he doesn't even want them to get to that point. He wants them to think about these matters in their pre-adult times. And the imperative he gives them, what he wants them to shape their mind by is this: I want you to rejoice in the Lord. This very first word here, rejoice, in Hebrew, talks about having happiness, being glad, having joy filled in your inner man. He uses the word then to have cheer. He says, thy heart cheer thee in the days of thy youth. The word for cheer here is interesting because he talks about having a good disposition, but really it's utilized to talk about it's so good in your life, it's almost abundant. It's to the point overflowing in your life. You are so cheerful, you are rejoicing. He's not, as some might think, granting license to the younger generation to live as they want. Some people would read verse 9 and say, rejoice, O young man, in thy youth, and cheer thy heart in the days of thy youth, and walk in the ways of thine heart, and in the sight of thine eyes. But know thou that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. He's not saying, go into open license to indulge in whatever you want to. Do whatever you want, but you better remember God's going to get you for it. That's not what Solomon is saying here. In fact, that would be antithetical to his entire teaching throughout this book. All throughout this book, what have we seen? He says for people to enjoy their life under the sun, living it before God who is in heaven. As we've stated previously, this book here, it is not written by an angry cynic who views life as meaningless and God as a cosmic ogre. It's written from the perspective of someone who knows what it is to pursue life under the sun with its passions. We would remember that Solomon had given himself over to that which was righteous. But sadly, Solomon had also given himself over to what? That which was unrighteous. And so as he composes this book of teachings, he's not told anybody throughout the whole book to live monastic lives devoid of any enjoyments at all. He's called us again and again and again to rejoice about our God who's in heaven. And to not only rejoice about our God who's in heaven, but to enjoy his blessings we have here upon earth. Consider how he's highlighted our God is sovereign even when the sinfulness of man is injustice or breeds injustice and oppression. Think about how he's talked about how we should enjoy the creation of God around us. He's also talked about enjoying the blessing of the gift of marriage, the blessing of having a heritage with children and leaving a legacy in our community. He's talked about the gift of friendship, the delights of food, the delights of nature, the delights of having emotions. What am I saying? Solomon tells these young people not rejoice and just live however you want, but God's going to get you. No. He's saying the opposite. I want you to rejoice. I want you to be thankful. I want you to enjoy and realize the abundance of blessings from your good God. He is your contentment and satisfaction, and then He has filled your life with blessings and enjoyment. There is so much to find satisfaction in about our God and all the blessings that overflow in our life. And so he tells them then to rejoice and cheer themselves, enjoy their God, enjoy their life thoughtfully. And note what he says, and let thy heart cheer thee in the days of thy youth, and walk in the ways of thine heart, and in the sight of thine eyes. What is he pushing them towards? I want you to rejoice in your God and make your own decisions very thoughtfully. Make your own decisions very thoughtfully. We all know at that age, and really it continues into our adulthood, but at that age, children are quite impressionable, are they not? And peer pressure, it can reign supreme. Peer pressure has been in every generation, right? Everybody sometimes thinks it's an American thing that's just started up the last 50 years. Peer pressure's always been around. As long as there's been people, as long as there's been pride, as long as there's been sin, there's been peer pressure. And so Solomon knows they'd be tempted maybe to let circumstances or other people shape their mindset, but so he tells them, listen, in your heart and with the sight of thine eyes, you need to make your own decisions. When he uses the word heart, obviously he's talking about, the Hebrew word there is his intellect, emotion, and will. When he uses the word eyes, he's speaking of that which is easily understood and seen in the physical realm. So, Solomon calls his readers to enjoy the pleasure of living this life. There are people, places, and things that please our temporal lives and desires upon earth that God has given us. It's a rich world we live in by the hand of God in heaven. And so he does not advocate mere entertainment, but that kind of joy that satisfies the intellectual as well as the other aspects of life. And so when he uses the words heart and eyes, the word for heart indicates the need of the inner being fully engaged in these decisions. But then the usage of the eyes indicates the ability to look plainly and examine what one needs to do. What's Solomon saying? I want you to engage your heart. I want you to engage your eyes in what you're doing. And I want you to make decisions. And whatever way you go, whatever decisions you make, You need to be mindful to rejoice in the blessings of your God, who He is, and what He's given around you. It's not a call to let circumstances dictate their choices or enjoyment of life. It's not a call to let others set the direction of their life. What He's wanting them to do is this: enjoy their life, enjoy it thoughtfully, enjoy it on purpose and with purpose. Remember, He's instructing the younger generation here, and so He says there's a whole life out there, a whole world out there with your God to enjoy, but you need to make some very serious and thoughtful decisions in your heart and in your life and what you see and how you act and the decisions you make in light of your God. So He gives them a cautionary principle to guide them in this issue of rejoicing. So the first imperative is rejoice. Thoughtfully enjoy your life. And the second imperative He gives them, though, is this: while you rejoice with the decisions you make, you need to know that God will bring those items into judgment. Enjoyment, in other words, should be balanced by perspective. And so secondly, tonight we see enjoyment should be balanced by perspective. The outlook should be framed with the idea of standing before God. Note what He says at the end of verse 9. You can rejoice. You'll need to make your own decisions. You'll need to think about what you're doing and act upon those decisions. But know thou that for all these decisions, God will bring thee into judgment. The word here for know speaks of having a cognizance of an important or specific piece of information. What's the important or specific piece of information Solomon wants them to focus or funnel or filter their rejoicing in life about? Know that there is a God in heaven, that all these things are acted out in front of, and all these decisions matter. Our way of thinking, in other words, should be influenced and ultimately dictated by this reality: God will bring thee into judgment. God will bring you into judgment. That phrase indicates that the wise person must and will consider God in his or her viewpoint. So when it comes to these decisions, He's not calling these young people to make willy-nilly decisions or decisions that help their desires or passions or infatuations. It's the opposite. He says, enjoy your life, but in all the decisions you make while enjoying life, remember, there is a God in heaven. There is a God in heaven who is holy. And there is a God in heaven, then, that His economy should sway you in these decisions. You should be subject to Him as His servant in these decisions. There are no isolated moments or acts outside of God's oversight. The God in heaven is acutely aware of the thoughts we dwell upon and the motivations that prompt us. Universally, mankind likes to act as if indulgence would be allowable, right? Unsaved individuals think their sin's not that bad and their choices will not be judged because they're not that bad of a person. But that's just the fallacy of our sin nature. But I would worry, too, that believers may be tempted to think the same thing, to think that God, because He is merciful, and He is, and that we are His children, and we are, and that He is patient, and He is, that we would also forget that there should be this level of sobriety about the decisions we make. Solomon calls us to an assurance of how God's realm operates. We should make choices in this life in light of the next. In His realm, He'll bring everything into judgment. Surely we understand this judgment's not an eternal condemnation because that's settled in His Son, Jesus Christ. But the reality is this: the choices you make in your life, the choices I make in my life, the choices these young people have yet to make, He wants them to remember that these choices have significance and they have impact beyond the moment. What do young people struggle with? I want it here, I want it now, I want satisfaction. It's rashness. There's a rushing to matters. And He says, before you rush into what you think you might enjoy, you should remember who your God is and enjoy the blessings He's given. But every decision you make should be framed by this reality: there is a holy God in heaven. And before you make that decision, you should remember He is there. You stand before Him. Choices good and bad have consequences. So maybe it's like the old saying, you're free to make your own choices, but what? You're never free from the choices you make, right? Solomon's wanting the young people to remember that. They must understand temptations are everywhere. They won't be above temptation, and they won't be exempt or the exception about temptation. As one author wrote, he said this, there is a poison suited to every diversity of taste. So, the young person's decisions of the heart and life must be filtered through this understanding. In turn, God is not absent in his responses and interactions with our pursuits. Young people were to recognize before they make their choices, do what he's told them to do the whole book, which is what? Fear God. The decisions you make, you're free to make. But they do have impact. They do matter with God and man. The God who is in heaven does care about the liberties we use here upon earth. And yes, he's granted us freedom and liberties, but he does expect us to align with his realm and his economy in these decisions. And so lastly, the last imperative he gives is for them to rejoice, for them to know, though, that all these things will be brought into judgment. But then he says this, so then you need to act. Your decisions should declare that perspective. If you say, I understand that I can rejoice, I understand then that God in heaven is there and he is aware of all my decisions and what I'm doing, what I'm not doing in light of who he is. He says, here's what the fear of God, knowing the economy of God, the holiness of God in heaven should do for your decisions here on earth. Our decision should declare the perspective of verse 9. And so he makes that clear in verse 10. Therefore, if God will bring everything to judgment, and he's a God you can rejoice in, and you do need to make your own decisions, young people, and not let others sway you, here's some good decisions I'm going to tell you to make, young people, in verse 10. Therefore, remove sorrow from thy heart and put away evil from thy flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity. He says here, remove sorrow from thy heart. The word for remove here has this idea of moving aside from something, turning away. If it's here, you're going there. You are changing your direction. The word for sorrow, when he talks about having sorrow in your inner man, your intellect, emotions, and will, the word for sorrow here speaks of vexation, anger, worry due to anticipated or impending misfortune. Solomon says there are decisions you might make that would speak of mental and emotional strain internally. And he says, remove yourself from those things. But then he says, put away evil from thy flesh. The wording here speaks of the need to pass over or pass on from choices that would cause you distress, tenseness, or misery. Note how he contextualizes that. The first one is internal. He says, remove sorrow from thy heart. The second is external. Put away evil from thy flesh. The verbiage suggests that young people then should reject those opportunities that rejoice against God and would incur then his chastening in their lives. Solomon doesn't want young people who are being reared in homes to fear Jehovah, being reared in homes to be his people, to be an example and a light to the Gentile nations around them, to make decisions in the present that they will regret in the future. And so you know what he tells them to do? Don't make decisions without thinking about the God who's in heaven that then will cause you internal dread and external issue. Don't make the decisions now that will have lasting negative consequences, that will impact God's usage of you as his chosen people. And so he calls them to move away from those decisions, because those decisions, he says, are rooted in vanity and sorrow from sin. So he tells them, don't do it. Life is filled with avoidable pitfalls. That's why he ends the verse by saying childhood and youth are vanity. Solomon's call to the young was for them to view this time in their lives as invaluable to the future with Jehovah as his representative to the Gentile world around them. And so he didn't want them to squander this time in vanity. The word here for youth was also used to describe the dawning of a day. The sunrise speaks to us, saying there's a new day ahead of us and that the night is past. But how long does that sunrise last for? It's pretty brief, isn't it? Just like a sunset, it's relatively quick. So what is Solomon saying? Life too is too short. He says here, childhood and youth, this dawning of the rest of your life, it happens, it goes by quick. Don't squander it in vanity. Remember this idea of the chasing of the wind. As much as a breath or a gust of wind would be gone, he says, don't utilize it in such a frivolous manner because it goes by too fast. You know, when you're younger, all you can think about is what? Growing up. Once you grow up, all you can think about is, I wish I could hit the brakes about now, right? Just slow this thing down just a little bit. Oh, man, I got married. Now, if I could just enjoy this. Oh, now we have kids. If I can just enjoy this. Oh, the kids are grown. Now, if I could just enjoy this. Oh, now there's grandbabies. If I could just enjoy this. We're always trying to hit the brakes and extend as much of the time as we have. But younger people are usually looking to try to speed through and get to the next thing. He says, I want you to be cautious. I want you to act and make your decisions that declare your perspective is rooted in verse 9, that there's a good God you can rejoice in, and you're going to make your own decisions and not let others make them for you, because you know ultimately there is a God in heaven. And therefore, put away from yourself. Don't go down that. If you know this decision because of the economy of God has told you, if you indulge in this liberty or this sin or this desire or this passion that's not in alignment with the God in heaven, it will bring this level of internal and external distress and issue. Remove yourself. Don't do it. Don't go down that path. If you're engaged in it now, get away from it. Align with God. Be with Him, because time is too brief to squander it in fleeting passions that will not produce God's desire in and through your life. So He gives them these three imperatives for their future. Let me give us three practical thoughts to walk away with. We have these younger people that are in our lives. If you're here and you have kids, I'm talking to you and your kids. If you're here and you say, I don't have kids, but I have nieces and nephews, then I want you to think about these things. If you're here and you have grandkids or somebody in the neighborhood who happens to be around you a lot and you have influence in their life, let me give us three practical thoughts then to help continue Solomon's teaching to the young generation of today. The first thought is this: let us help this generation, kids, grandkids, young adults, understand the reality that there is a good God to rejoice in and rejoice with. Can I say I'm burdened when young people consider Christianity a bunch of mechanical do's and a bunch of mechanical don'ts. As if that's all this whole Jesus thing is mechanical do's and mechanical don'ts. Listen, we know there are decisions of faith and there are choices to make, and there are very clear because He's holy do's and don'ts. We know that. But Christianity was never about do's and don'ts. God in the Old Testament with the nation of Israel was never about just do's and don'ts, so they had a lot of them in the law. At the end of the day, it's always been about having a vibrant, living relationship with the true God that we can find our contentment and satisfaction in. Just like in the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve were able to find full contentment and satisfaction with their Father, so you and I could have today. And so often we do what Adam and Eve did, right? We decide, I'll go beyond that. I'll do what I think is better or best or more satisfying. Help the younger generation recognize there's a good God to rejoice in and rejoice with. If all our kids see is habit without heart, where do we think they'll be at 18? Where do you think they're going to be when they have that first child? When their children are growing up? When all they've seen is habit, there's no heart behind it. I fear we have not followed Solomon's instruction to the younger people by not practicing it as older people ourselves. So let us help them by letting them see it's a good God to rejoice in and with. But secondly, let me give us a practical thought here. Let's help this generation, kids, grandkids, and young adults, recognize that privileges of pleasure should be viewed through the lens of eternal judgments. Let's help them understand that it's not just wrong because I said so. It's wrong because in the economy of God, it's unhealthy, it's an unhelpful item. It's not just, I'm your parent, I said it, or I'm your grandparent, and in my house. Now, let's help them go beyond that to see that the pleasure of sin is just that. It is only pleasurable for what? A season. And then comes all the consequences. They should understand from our lips and lives that temptations do not satisfy that which God alone can. Temptations are a shallow substitute. I like the way one author put it. He said this, the honey of indulgence passes away, but the sting remains behind. Isn't that true of temptation in our lives? Let's make sure that the younger generation understand the reality behind temptations. It won't produce and get what they think it will get. And as young people, they are very prone and susceptible because their knowledge base and their experience base in the Lord is so small and fragile. May we be the ones that step in to help them. And then lastly, can I say let us model enjoyment throughout life. Model enjoyment throughout life. I get Solomon's talking to the younger generation here saying, you have a God, rejoice young man in your youth, rejoice young lady in your youth, rejoice in your God, enjoy your time with Him. But could I encourage us to model it beyond the teenage years? Beyond our 20s, beyond our 30s, beyond our 40s, 50s, and 60s? May we be a model of rejoicing in our God. I fear that far too often the weights of responsibility, the frustrations of living in a sinful world, and the disappointments or hurts of this life rob us from choosing to rejoice in our God. Life will not be all blessings as we saw last week, but it is a blessed life nonetheless. I'm grieved for a younger generation who may see an older generation only speak of the ills of their life, whether it's pains, disappointments, frustrations with God and man, upset about and discontent with where they're at now in life, the capacity maybe they do or don't have. Instead of finding a people who can rejoice in their good God, though the sinful body and the sinful world may take its toll, as it were, they often perhaps see people who are saying to rejoice in God, but then don't at the dinner table. And are telling them there's a good God, but when they're asked how they are, it's 5 minutes of how horrible life is. Let's model enjoyment throughout our life. Does that mean it's always going to be an easy choice? The answer is what? No. There is betrayal in this world, is there not? There is oppression and injustice, as Solomon has wrote about. There are items that are going to disappoint us, disillusion us, anger us, tempt us. But that doesn't change that we have a God in heaven who is still on the throne, as He's always been and ever will be, in the affairs around us that grieve us. And we can still find plenty to rejoice about, even in the midst of difficult circumstances. Yes, there is a time and a season to have pain and loss, and I understand that, and suffering is not something anybody desires, but our God is gracious and sufficient and able to help us through each stage of it. So may the young people who are told to rejoice be able to look ahead and see, I'm not the only one who's rejoicing. That as I'm 12, I still see somebody at 72 who's still rejoicing in God and with God. So there's 3 imperatives that Solomon gives to young people to help them make good decisions about their future. So may we help the young people in that. May we model it also in our own lives as well. Let's take a moment to bow with me, if you would, and maybe tonight you just in the stillness of this moment before I pray, maybe you want to pray and ask God to help you rejoice in Him, or maybe you want to pray and ask Him to help you with somebody He's put in your life. Maybe it's your children, and tonight you think, oh man, I need to help them understand about making this decision better. Or, oh man, I need to model by God's grace rejoicing with Him about matters that are adverse to what I would want and my desire is. And so tonight, we're going to take a moment. We're going to have Miss Laurie play just one verse, and then I will close us in a word of prayer. Father, we just thank you for this evening and for your word. And thank you that Solomon was inspired of you to write about the younger generation, how important it is to be a blessing and a help to them. And Lord, may we be a help to them in not only instruction and in training, but in modeling it by your help. And may our young people in this church grow up rejoicing in you, but living with the reality that you in heaven are a holy God, and they do need to align with you, and that the decisions they make now should not be done rashly, but they should be done in consideration of your righteousness. So, Father, help our young people. Help the moms and dads raising those young people. Help the grandparents that are an influence, and the aunts and uncles, and help us that have young people in our lives around us that maybe aren't family to be an example, an illustration, just a testament of your grace, just like Old Testament Israel would have been a testament of your grace to the Gentile nations around them. May we be also to the unsaved world around us as well. Thank you for your word. Thank you for being an awesome God that we can rejoice in. So, Lord, may we go forward tomorrow doing just that. And we ask it in Christ's name. Amen. Just want to remind you about the Seed Line Project. You can do any of that this Saturday. If you can move your hands at all, if you're worried about, I can do this, can't do that, any of it's capable. You're welcome to do that. And so we want to encourage you to be with us this Saturday for that, and look forward to being with you Sunday. Let's stand as Brother Nate leads us in the praise dismissal.
Sorry about this. 385. We'll do 385, which is we'll sing Where He Leads Me, I Will Follow. And we'll sing this page 385 as we're dismissing. I can hear my Savior calling. I can hear my Savior calling. I can hear my Savior calling. Take thy cross and follow me. Where he leads me, I